Hello everybody, hello and welcome to today's edition of the Travel Insider. My name is Sofia Rattinger and joining me is financial analyst Mr. Elliot Bullman. Elliot, how are you?
Great,
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Great.
Yeah.
Did you have a good time?
Yes, I did.
Fantastic.
Yes.
And Happy New Year to everybody out there watching, and welcome to today's show. We've got great news coming up for you, but before we start, don't forget to tune in through our website, mexiconewsnetwork.com, and follow us on all our social networks, Google, Twitter, and Facebook. Let's start with the information.
There's no denying that 2016 didn't precisely start out well for the travel industry, a year tainted with terrorist attacks and disease. It was also an election year, in which the industry saw one of its own nominated for the presidency, even as he spread rhetoric to free movement of tourists. There were, of course, many bright spots along the way, such as the first commercial flights and cruise ships in 5 decades bringing tourists from US to Cuba, and exciting ships introductions, including the first new build from Regent 7 Seas Cruises since 2003. But overall, this wasn't the easiest year to be a traveler, a travel company, or a travel seller. On this edition of the Travel Insider, we bring you, as presented on the Travel Weekly magazine, the topics that made the year most memorable, for better and for worse.
In January, worrisome news was coming out of Brazil. The birth defect known as microcephaly was being reported in babies born to women infected with the Zika virus, transmitted mainly by mosquitoes, which prompted the Center for Disease Control and Prevention to recommend that pregnant women postpone travel to areas with Zika transmission until additional studies confirmed that the virus was the cause of the defect.
As we all know now, not only did the link turn out to be real, but the virus was moving north. Zika has been locally transmitted in 30 countries across Americas and the Caribbean.
Zika's impact on tourism has been severe in some cases, especially for Brazil, whose Olympic spotlight was dimmed by the virus. The country found itself deploying considerable resources to fight both mosquitoes and negative public perception after a group of health experts called for the games to be cancelled or postponed so as not to exacerbate the epidemic. As it turned out, not one Zika infection was reported in Brazil during the Olympics, according to the World Health Organization.
Did you remember about that time?
It was
the Olympic Games?
Very nervous for Brazil, I think, and after all that it put into building a perfect Olympics. But you know, it's always good, obviously, to have warnings and alerts, but you know, in the end,
I mean, to be careful.
To be
That's
careful,
yes.
right? And I think travelers went prepared, and obviously the athletes and everybody in Brazil, and tourism at large. I mean, as everybody has carried on as usual because of good information. So.
And everything went really fine.
Absolutely.
Yes. An increasingly dangerous adversary for hotels in 2016. Airbnb's 3 million listed homes hosted 70 million guests during the year, outpassing the overall accommodations industry and fueling oppositions from both hoteliers and city and state governments.
None of this seems to be slowing the company, as the adoption of home-based lodging continues to soar. According to Focusrite, almost 1 in 3 US travelers stayed at a home-based unit last year, up from about 1 in 10 in 2011.
Airbnb's rapid expansion has brought its own kind of growing pains, and this year it had to address growing incidents of discrimination by hosts. The company enacted a policy prohibiting the denial of stay requests based on race, ethnicity, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, or disability. And it is working on a feature that automatically blocks any calendar dates offered by a host who has rejected a stay request for those dates.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, Airbnb is having a few challenges, and it has posed quite a kind of a threat to a lot of hoteliers, and it's certainly proving controversial in a lot of municipalities around the world.
And I think for all the backpackers, it's this new kind of place to stay. That's a very good way. I mean, that's a very good chance of find a place that is of course, cheaper than other places, than other hotels, don't you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's budgetary, as you say. In some parts of the world, I mean, I know there's been a lot of controversy in places like San Francisco and New York because it's kind of expensive there with rental, and they're saying it's kind of pushing up rental prices because, you know, most landlords over there are having some problems now because I think the Attorney General in New York is taking a kind of a stance with Airbnb. But in other parts of the world, you know, it's becoming, you know, it's welcomed. I mean, Amsterdam, they've just actually created a whole new sort of welcome package for Airbnb. So it depends where you're looking at, but I think people just generally have to abide by the laws, you know, as far as rental prices. But no, it's a good idea, good initiative.
Yes. And now we're talking about terrorism. In other news, terrorist violence continued to make headlines in 2016, with the Paris attacks in November 2015 turning out to be only the first in a series of strikes that rocked tourism hotspots this year, including Istanbul, Brussels, Orlando, and Nice, France. The attacks on airports in Istanbul and Brussels turned the idea of airport security on its head.
While much had been made of how resilient travellers have become in the 15 years since 9/11, the recent selection of targets seemed to have taken a toll. Long-haul travel to Europe decreased this summer by 0.9% after 5 years of 6.5% annual growth, according to Forward Keys, an airline data analysis firm. France's second quarter RevPAR dropped 13% from 2015, with occupancy down about 4% to 68%, according to STR. Turkey fared even worse, as second quarter RevPAR plunged 37% from a year earlier, while occupancy was down 16 percentage points to 51%.
Well, now here's hoping for a calmer 2017.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we definitely want to see, you know, those numbers increase again in Europe. But yeah, I think, you know, security measures are certainly much tighter, and you certainly see in Latin America, particularly in Mexico, you know, we haven't suffered or experienced any drop in tourism. In fact, I think record numbers last year.
Thank God. Yes.
So that hopefully continues.
Now we're going to talk about Mr. Donald Trump. You go.
The election of a hotelier to the highest office in the United States was not considered to be the travel industry victory that might have been expected. Throughout Trump's campaign, travel executives railed against his rhetoric. Tour operators boycotted his properties after he made disparaging comments about Mexican immigrants. And at major travel events such as June's annual New York University Hospitality Conference, and before that at the World Travel and Tourism Conference Global Summit, travel executives took aim at his protectionist and anti-immigration policies. In September, Travel Weekly found that 61% of travel agents were recommending Trump-branded hotels and resorts less frequently since he began his presidential bid, and that more than half of their clients were not interested in staying at Trump-branded properties.
It didn't help that shortly after being elected, Trump doubled down on his threat to terminate the 2014 deal normalizing relations between the U.S. and Cuba, a potential end to one of the most exciting travel stories in decades, just as U.S. airlines launched the first commercial flights to Havana since the onset of this country's trade embargo of Cuba in the early 1960s.
How a Trump presidency will actually impact the travel industry remains to be seen. Some executives are optimistic. We'll have to check back in a year to see how that worked out.
Donald Trump.
Well, yeah, you know, for everybody right now, it's nail-biting. Only about 2 weeks away till he takes office.
Like, what's going to happen?
Yeah, you know, of course, with as far as Mexico's concerned, you know, the whole free trade agreement with NAFTA and how that may resolve itself. But yeah, let's hope that we have a, you know, consistent start to this year.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Now, speaking of Cuba, what a difference a year makes. This year started with such promise after 3 years of diplomacy between the U.S. and Cuba. Airlines, cruise ships, and hotels were readying plans for their first Cuba ventures, while President Obama in March became the first sitting U.S. president to visit Cuba in 88 years.
Just before his visit, the Obama administration eased travel restrictions to Cuba for individuals by allowing them to make individual people-to-people educational trips to the island without having to travel with an authorized group.
But for those who applauded the thawing of relations between the Cold War adversaries, 2016 is not ending on such a good note. Following the death of Fidel Castro on November 25th, President-elect Trump threatened to roll back the rapprochement. And he said, if Cuba is unwilling to make a better deal for the Cuban people, the Cuban American people, and the U.S. as a whole, I will terminate the deal, Trump tweeted. Despite that statement, several U.S.-based cruise lines received approval in early December to make calls to the island country.
Yeah, and you notice how much now Cuba is in the headlines because a lot of Americans, I mean, Cyber Monday, over 150% increase in demand for Cuba travel from Americans. I mean, they're so curious, they really want to go.
And I think all the hopes woke up when Obama went to the island.
It was historic, wasn't it?
Yes.
Do you remember that? You know,
Yes.
that shaking hands and...
He has a lot of charisma.
Yeah, he's achieved some really interesting diplomatic relationships. You've got to hope that Trump seizes the opportunity
Yes.
and takes it forward now.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see now in terms of what's going to happen in Europe because of obviously Brexit, like the Trump election on this side of the pond. June's Brexit meant that Britain voted to leave the European Union, and that shocked the world and catapulted the travel industry into unprecedented territory.
But immediately following the vote and after the pound plunge, the industry saw at least short-term opportunity. UK tour and hotel inquiries surged as travelers realized how much further their currency would stretch in the once very expensive area.
Yeah, long term, the outlook was much less rosy as the industry pondered what Brexit would mean for the stability of the European Union, the possible loss of open skies agreements, and how any sustained weakness of the pound would impact consumer confidence and worldwide markets. All in all, a very intense year on all fronts. So let's all work together to achieve greater things this new year.
Oh yeah, we had these topics, this program. Brexit, Cuba, Donald Trump, Zika, Airbnbs, terrorism.
But global travel demand, I know, is on the rise. I mean, we've seen from the World Travel Market Fair, record numbers of people coming into Mexico this year.
Yeah,
we talked about potentially 35 million visitors to the country. So, I mean, we're obviously on a very strong growth track right now. We just hope the political and global economic situation holds itself together, right?
And of course, we hope to have a better year this 2017. Well, this was all for today. Thank you for staying with us once again here on the Travel Insider. My name is Sofia Rattinger.
And I'm Elliot Bullman. Remember to stay with us on MexicoNewsNetwork.com and all our social media networks, Facebook, Twitter, and Google+, to stay in touch with what's going on in Mexico and the world. Until next time.